never believed in ghosts. I always thought they were just a figment of people's imagination, a result of their fear and superstitions. That was until I moved into the old mansion at Whispering Hollows. I had inherited the house from my great-aunt who had passed away. She had always been a mysterious woman, rarely seen in town, and never had any visitors. I had never even met her, but I had heard stories about her from my parents. They said she was strange and had a fascination with the supernatural. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was just happy to have a new place to call home. But as soon as I stepped foot in the mansion, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air was thick and heavy, as if someone was watching me. I brushed it off as my imagination and started to unpack my things. As days went by, strange things started to happen. I would hear whispers in the dead of night, and objects would move on their own. At first, I thought it was just me being paranoid, but then I started seeing things. A shadowy figure would appear in the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, it would disappear. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched never went away. I started to feel a presence in my room, as if someone was standing right behind me. I couldn't take it anymore and decided to do some research on the house. To my horror, I found out that Whispering Hollows was built on an old cemetery. It was said that the spirits of the dead were not at rest and haunted the land. My great-aunt had always been fascinated by this, and had even performed rituals in the house to communicate with the spirits. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't leave the house as it was my only inheritance, but I couldn't stay either. Every night, I would hear the whispers getting louder and more aggressive. I could feel their presence closing in on me. One night, I woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was my great-aunt, but she looked different. Her eyes were dark and hollow, and her skin was pale and lifeless. She whispered my name and reached out to me, but before she could touch me, I screamed and woke up in a cold sweat. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out of that house. I packed my things and left that same night. As I drove away from Whispering Hollows, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I thought I was finally free from the haunting, but I was wrong. A few weeks later, I received a call from the local authorities. They told me that the mansion had caught fire and burned down to the ground. When they investigated, they found my great-aunt's body in the basement, along with several other bodies. It was believed that she had been performing human sacrifices to appease the spirits. I was shocked and horrified. I couldn't believe that I had been living in that house with those spirits and my great-aunt's twisted rituals. I never went back to Whispering Hollows, but I could still hear the whispers in my dreams. It was a constant reminder of the horrors that resided within that old mansion. From that day on, I believed in ghosts, and I knew that Whispering Hollows would always be haunted by the souls that were never at rest. I woke up to the sound of thunder outside my window, the storm raging on with no sign of stopping. I shivered under my blankets, feeling a chill in the air that seemed to seep into my bones. Despite the raging storm, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but the battery died quickly and I was left in the darkness of my room. I let out a sigh and decided to try and get some rest, hoping that the storm would pass by the time I woke up. But as I closed my eyes, a strange image flashed in my mind. It was a crypt, shrouded in shadows and darkness. I could feel a sense of dread and fear emanating from it, and a voice whispered in my head, "Come to the shadowed crypt." I sat up in bed, my heart racing. It was just a dream, I told myself, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger, and the image of the crypt was etched in my mind. Unable to shake off the strange dream, I decided to get out of bed and make myself a cup of tea. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed that the storm outside had only gotten worse. The sound of thunder and rain seemed to grow louder with each step I took. But it wasn't just the storm that was making me feel uneasy. I could feel a presence, a shadow, following me. I turned around, but there was no one there. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I quickly made my tea and went back to my room, hoping that the warmth and comfort would calm my nerves. But as I took a sip of my tea, I heard a faint whisper in my ear. "Come to the shadowed crypt." I jumped out of bed, spilling my tea all over the floor. The voice was getting louder, more insistent, and the image of the crypt was getting clearer in my mind. Without thinking, I grabbed my coat and headed out into the storm. The wind and rain whipped at my face, but I couldn't stop. I had to find the crypt. I had to know what was drawing me towards it. After what felt like hours of wandering in the storm, I finally came upon a crumbling old building. The sign above the entrance read, "The Shadowed Crypt." My heart was pounding in my chest as I pushed open the heavy doors. Inside, the air was thick and musty, and the only source of light was a few flickering candles. But even in the dim light, I could see shadows moving and shifting, as if they were alive. I took a step forward, and suddenly a figure appeared in front of me. It was a woman, her face twisted into a grotesque mask. She beckoned me forward, her voice echoing in my mind. "Come to the shadowed crypt. Join us in eternal darkness." But before I could react, the woman disappeared into the shadows. I turned around to run, but I found myself face to face with more shadowy figures. They surrounded me, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I was paralyzed with fear as they closed in on me, their voices whispering in a language I couldn't understand. And then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they vanished, leaving me alone in the crypt. I stumbled out of the building, my mind reeling with fear and confusion. I never went back to the shadowed crypt, but the memory of that night still haunts me. And every time there's a storm, I can't help but feel a chilling presence, whispering in my ear, "Come to the shadowed crypt." It was a dark and stormy night, the kind that sends shivers down your spine and makes you want to stay indoors. But I had no choice. I had to venture out into the night for a job. You see, I work as a gravedigger in the local cemetery. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills. As I made my way through the eerie silence of the cemetery, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. Every step I took felt like someone was following me. But when I turned around, there was no one there. I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me and continued on my way. But then I heard a noise. It was a low, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. I turned around and saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was the Grinning Reaper. I had heard stories about him, but I never believed them. He was said to be a vengeful spirit, haunting the cemetery, waiting for his next victim. I wanted to run, but my feet were frozen to the ground. The Grinning Reaper slowly emerged from the shadows, his face twisted into a terrifying grin. He was tall and thin, with a long black cloak covering his skeletal body. I could feel his eyes piercing through me, and I knew I was in serious trouble. I tried to scream for help, but no sound came out of my mouth. The Grinning Reaper started walking towards me, his footsteps echoing through the cemetery. I could see his bony fingers reaching out towards me, and I knew that I was about to become his next victim. But just as he was about to touch me, a bright light appeared behind him. It was the moon, shining through the clouds and illuminating the area. The Grinning Reaper let out a blood-curdling scream and disappeared into thin air. I stood there, shaking and sweating, trying to catch my breath. The moonlight had saved me, but I knew that the Grinning Reaper would be back. I quickly finished my work, not wanting to stay in the cemetery any longer than I had to. As I made my way back home, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I turned around, I could see the Grinning Reaper's face in the shadows, taunting me. I knew that I would never be able to forget that face, and I was sure that I would never be able to sleep peacefully again. From that night on, I made sure to never venture into the cemetery alone. I always had a companion with me, whether it was a friend or a stray dog. I never wanted to be caught off guard by the Grinning Reaper again. But despite my precautions, I could never escape the feeling that the Grinning Reaper was always watching me, waiting for his next chance to take me to the other side. Every time I walked past the cemetery, I could feel his presence, and I knew that I would never truly be safe until I left this town for good. The Grinning Reaper had become a part of my life, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurked in the shadows. And even though I tried to forget that fateful night, I knew that I would never be able to escape the clutches of the Grinning Reaper.